Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to the organizers of this workshop for having me, although I applied rather late and announced that I was going to come. This is the working title of my research project, which I will be carrying out within the INTEGRIM framework. The main aim of which it is to better understand the role and consequences of irregular status for processes of local level everyday integration in different national and particularly local settings. So therefore I chose London and Barcelona as the two research sites. And what I'm particularly interested in is how immigrants in irregular situations, that is third country nationals without the formal right granted to reside in the state where they live, do become part of the society in which they live by negotiating and constantly constructing their position within local communities, institutions, state as well as non-state, and labor markets, in the face of what is increasingly perceived as a rather hostile environment. So the investigation will try to combine the analysis of individual migrants' perceptions, strategies, and behaviors with that of more structural incentives and constraints, which of course frame these behaviors. So a little bit more about the topic, which is of course high up on most political agendas. The numbers speak for themselves. It is, however, very often perceived as an exogenous threat to be dealt with mostly at the European, like the EU's external borders, increasingly within a common European framework, while the ways in which individual member states identify and treat these people once they are living in their territories, that is as irregular residents rather than irregular immigrants, varies considerably and has received less attention. And what at the same time most EU member states seem to have in common is at least a tendency towards so-called policies of internal control or discouragement, as they are called sometimes, which try to limit or restrict or at least control the access of unlawful residents to a wide range of basic rights and services, rather than the access of potential unlawful immigrants to the territory in the first place. So it has been argued that there's a shift of control policies to the inside. At the same time, and in contrast obviously to those legally admitted, irregular migrants are always left out in any political or public discourse on integration. They are per definition excluded from any formal integration policy, as well as most other social policies. While in practice, they do not live in complete isolation from the host society. Although the state and at least most of its institutions might not officially support their integration, they still do get in contact with a wide range of within their daily activities, and they get involved inevitably in different spheres of local everyday life. They make friends, they may raise kids who go to school, they find work, may learn the local language, go shopping, things like this. Which under other conditions they might attend, like social, cultural, sporting events, religious events, things which under other circumstances would count as integration probably. And they thereby de facto transcend very often the kind of strict boundary between legal and illegal status in practice. And it's precisely this rather obvious contradiction actually between their absolute exclusion from at least the legal political sphere, while at the same time they are relatively included in many other spheres of local life, which is kind of the starting point of my study. And it's I guess what I'm proposing is that in order to gain a better understanding of migrant irregularity in general, it is important to look at their situation not only in terms of their active exclusion by states and policies, or their marginalization within society, which is kind of the classic approach, but also through the opposite conceptual lens of immigrant integration, which is, I think, how this presentation kind of fits in to this workshop as well. So there are, of course, a number of theoretical considerations underlying this study. Most importantly, the idea that modern society is neither an internally homogeneous nor externally really strictly bounded entity, but a highly differentiated complex of various functional subsystems, each following its own logic and values and developing its own organizational culture. This is, of course, based on Niklas Luhmann's famous work on the differentiation of society, which Giuseppe Scordino has suggested to be applied to the study of migration and irregular migration in particular. Because in such a society, of course, the very logic of immigration control and the resulting stratification of rights and statuses among people is immediately relevant only in some societal and institutional contexts, while it is rather irrelevant in others. So this means, first of all, that the attribute irregular or illegal, or however these people are referred to, neither characterize the whole migratory process as a whole. Often people also switch between legal and illegal status, between different legal statuses. And it also doesn't, of course, describe the entire existence of any individual migrant. So what it describes is always only their relationship to the state in which they live. So not even necessarily the relationship to the city in which they live. It's mostly the relationship to the state, really. And now this has important implications for their position within society as such, because the exclusion is a legal political one mostly, while it is not automatically an exclusion that affects each and every aspect of their life. For me, it's particularly, this perspective is and seems to be interesting for looking at these policies of internal control that I mentioned, because what the rationale behind it is that they try to shift the responsibility of immigration control from the classic state agent, the border guard, or whoever was standing at the border checking ID and passports, to all kinds of often non-state actors, including doctors, teachers, private landlords lately in the UK. All these people who don't really have anything to do with immigration control necessarily. And so this means that the very logic of one subsystem, I call it the migration state, but it's only one subsystem of society, it has to be imposed upon several others, which originally were meant and developed to fulfill a completely different function, be that the provision of healthcare, education, the accumulation of wealth, the prevention of crime, all these things that are not really have anything to do with immigration as such. So this is a preliminary set of research questions which I will focus on. Under which conditions can and effectively do irregular foreign residents access or relate to the various subsystems of society? Which factors contradict or weaken this link between the idea that if somebody is irregular, he can't access these things? How are these conditions perceived by the people themselves and challenged in their daily routines? What are their tactics to circumvent these restrictions? And more broadly, which implications does this all have for the overall potential of policies of internal control in general? So my analysis as such will focus mostly on the relationship and everyday interactions of irregular foreign residents within different spheres of their mostly local social environment. In order to do so, I came up with this analytical framework, which is much simpler than it might look. It's also a little bit difficult to read. Two-dimensional framework. On the horizontal axis, there are the different societal subsystems, so to say. I can't read it myself. The legal political system, the labor market, then in the area of the market, like the shopping and consumption, the voluntary sector, NGO sector, going down up to like the personal networks, the area of family, private life, and so on. So, and on the vertical axis, there are the different stages, levels, and agents involved in the politics of internal control. First of all, formal policy frameworks, laws and regulations enacted mostly at the national level, which are then to be implemented mostly at the level of local administration. So all the actors involved in the implementation of these policies, which also includes or may include the agency of non-state actors, increasingly so. But these, on the third, this category also includes NGOs, ethnic networks, the media, who might either be part of the implementation process or contesting the implementation of these laws. And last but not least, actually for me it's a very important issue, the migrants' own agency in dealing with the structures that they find in these local settings. So the main thing are the blue arrows, actually, which represent the relationship of an irregular migrant, for example, in his or her role as a worker with the labor market. So this would be one relationship, which is in turn influenced by these different factors on the left. So in practical terms, every individual cell of this framework would represent one potential inquiry, one potential element of the overall inquiry, so to say. So I could ask which is the influence of a particular set of NGOs, for example, on the relationship of an irregular migrant as a consumer and the consumption, which is not so. The idea is that it is very different, and the influences of these different levels are sometimes contradicting each other. So there might be a very strict law enacted at the national level, limiting the access to the labor market very strictly to those legally resident. Then it will depend a lot on how this is implemented, whether there are employer checks on a very regular basis involving all the sectors that there are, and whether there are private agencies that would still make it very likely that people would find a job in construction because there are middlemen who are organizing some kind of fortified papers or papers from other people. And this would go down to the strategy of the migrants themselves, like the ways that they find to still become part of these institutions or social settings. I will end here with an overview of the research methods. It's mostly the most important method I will use is semi-structured interviews, both with migrants in irregular situations themselves, as well as all those people who, in their role as, for example, police officers, local public service providers, but also teachers, potentially doctors, come or may come in contact with irregular migrants. I'll leave it here. Thanks a lot.